I'm Winston Goodfellow, award-winning writer, photographer, and automotive archaeologist. So for today's archaeological dig, we're going to venture into what I call the unobtainium mines. And in this case, we're looking at what are called concept cars, and back in the day were called dream cars from the 1950s. This is things like the Alfa Romeo Bats, the Pegaso Thrill, and then also this, the Dodge Dart 400, which I personally prefer calling it the Dual Ghia 400. And we'll get into the differentiation between Chrysler, Dodge, and Dual Ghia. It's a fascinating story because we'll deal with the Rat Pack, the GT car, and a whole bunch of other fascinating things, and the best designer you've never heard of. Let's go digging. Okay everyone, we're going to start our archaeological dig by talking about the designer of the Dual Ghia 400. Giovanni Savonuzzi is the best designer you've never heard of. When you start looking at the guy's resume, he's fantastic, and it's just too bad his name is not better known. So he was born in 1911, and then his career in the automotive industry started in 1940 at Fiat. But he wasn't in the automotive division. He was in Fiat's airplane division, where he worked with making engines. In 1945, he then went over to Cisitalia, a small startup firm, where he designed one of the coolest cars ever. Just listen to the name of the car, the Savonuzzi Streamliner. From there, 2-3 years later, he designed perhaps the most influential post-war design, which was the Cisitalia 202 Berlinetta. A lot of people associate the design with Pinin and Farina. Pinin and Farina built the body that was based on Savonuzzi's design. In 1953, he became technical director at Ghia. His designs at Ghia include the smoking cool Supersonic, talk about a great name for a car, and then what I think is his masterpiece, the Ghia Gilda. And the Gilda, it's true rolling sculpture because it is the perfect combination of form and color. It's absolutely sensational. It was so influential that a number of designs came after it, which include the one-off Super Gilda Ferrari 410 Super America. Then there was a smaller speed record car called the Nibio 2. Then there was the Dodge Dart. And so that brings us right up to speed with the Dual Ghia 400, because it is also based on the original Ghia Gilda design. A big design trend in the 1950s was the advent of the jet airplane and the jet engine. And you can really see how it influenced the coach builders, the automotive manufacturers, and everything. So not only were these fins quite aerodynamic, and when you read the in-period articles on the predecessor to this, they talk about how this really helped the management of airflow in the wind tunnel, but also just as a design element. Jet engines, jet airplanes, really cool thing. And so they were all over it. And this is where Savonuzzi was a master, because it fits the form. And so the way it comes along here and then just ever so elegantly blends into the door. And then also what I really like, and this is classic Savonuzzi, of just how masterful he was with using colors, is the black, this lovely pale yellow, chrome strip here, black there. I don't know if Savonuzzi actually designed this car, but it's very, very, very clear. His influence is all over it. So in that way, it does have his fingerprints. And so this car was built in Turin. They sent a Chrysler 300B chassis over to Turin. They made the car. We've got a Hemi under the hood. And then it went back to Dual Motors. And Dual Motors was in Detroit. And what I loved there was they put on these smoking cool hubcaps that look like a knockoff and say Dual Ghia on it. You can see how they continue the color combination. And so all these are elements of the dream car. The shape, just the sensationalism of the whole thing and how it comes together beautifully as a package, where this is one they really thought at some time, which now seems to be coming true, cars would fly. Another fascinating aspect about this marvelous piece of unobtainium is the way it played into two major trends that were going on in the 1950s. The first was the ascent of the Gran Turismo. And so a lot of people think that started with the Lancia Aurelia GT. And then of course, there were other famous marques, Ferrari, Maserati, Aston Martin. You could go into more obscure things like, for instance, Pegaso. But there was something they all had in common, which was they could be a little temperamental and sometimes even unreliable. And so that leads to our second major trend. You can call it either the transatlantic marriage, or I prefer to think of it as the best of both worlds philosophy, which was where you would get manufacturers who would mate European coachwork with an American drivetrain, because that gave you instant high horsepower plus reliability. And so for instance, here in the Dual Ghia 400, we have a big Chrysler Hemi torque flight transmission. So this thing offered real silky smooth performance. And that now brings us to our nameplate, Dual Ghia. So as this movement was going on, there was a gentleman named Eugene Casserole who was an industrialist over in America. We don't have enough time here to really dig into his background, but the guy was totally into cars. And so he played into this trend and started a company called Dual Motors. And so they came out with a car in 1957 called the Dual Ghia. Designed by Ghia, Chrysler engine, their own underpinnings that were based on Chrysler mechanicals. And what's really fascinating is, bang, the thing caught like wildfire. When that car debuted, the crowds literally went crazy. So much so that the most famous group of individuals in the world, literally at the time, were the Rat Pack. And the Rat Pack were all over Dual Ghias. And so Frank had one, Dean did not. Tony Curtis wanted one but couldn't get one. And then I had Peter Lawford was in there. Glenn Ford, who was not part of the Rat Pack but a huge actor, he had one. And so Dual Ghias were real prestige. You can even see what it says. Back in December 1958, Life magazine did an issue where they had an article devoted to the Rat Pack. And so there's more than one paragraph in there talking about Dual Ghias and just the whole period's fascination with them and how they were a true Rat Pack car. They only made 100 of them, 1957 and 1958. And so Dual Ghia, Casserole, the team, they were starting to look for a successor to the Dual Ghia model. And so that's why this car came about. This was looked at as the successor to that. And so this was called the Dual Ghia 400. And so Chrysler 300B chassis was sent on over to Italy. Ghia did the design, coachwork, all that type of stuff, got the car running, bang, went back to Dual Motors in Detroit. They put on their own badging. And then when Casserole saw the car, he decided this was a little too radical for Dual Ghia to have this as a second model, so it remained a one-off. But because he had done the cash outlay to finance the thing, he still thought it was smart to take it out on the show circuit. So at its first stop in New York, at an auto show there, it was on the stand, and they put a $15,000 price tag on it, which was an astronomical figure at the time when you think a Highline Cadillac was half of that or less. He figured nobody's going to come along and take it. Gentleman came on up, I want the car. They told him the price, bang, he bought the car. And so this went on the show circuit throughout 1958, and then after that, it was delivered to its first owner. He had it until 1977. Then it was sold to its second owner, and he had it until 2019 when it went to its third owner, the Ram's Head Collection. So they've had it since then. And so here we are, Scottsdale, Arizona, with this marvelous piece of unobtainium. But what's interesting about this is the unobtainium is becoming obtainable. So this Friday at Bonhams auction, this car is going across the auction block. So for those of you with deep pockets and real good taste, you've got your chance to get some unobtainium. Okay guys and gals, here we are driving the Dual Ghia 400. And what I love about this thing is, for someone my height, 6'3", this is extremely comfortable. You've got fantastic visibility all around. Dash easy to see. If there's one detriment, but this is so typical of the cars, it's not exactly the world's tightest turning radius, but smooth ride. This was basically cutting edge Chrysler technology back in the day, which was good stuff. And so this thing's extremely comfortable on the road. Steering is nice and light. I wouldn't mind having a mechanic take a look at the brakes just a little bit. You know, they seem to grab just fine. Well, this thing actually feels like it wants to run a bit. I love the torque in this thing. Holy Toledo. Boy, I could see this thing being a marvelous just cruiser, touring car, whatever. And Eric was telling me earlier, Eric's with Bonhams, and he was telling me earlier that the previous owner, he actually used this thing a fair amount. The guy owned it for 40 years, would take it out for a cruise, and then, you know, drive it to shows and all that type of stuff, but it was used. And so what's great is this thing is in totally original condition. I mean, literally, the only thing that I would do is probably let a top flight detailer loose on it and maybe have it give out a mechanical once-over, and then you have a stupendous piece. And what's really nice about this particular car is this gets you in any event just like that. I mean, Pebble would take this thing was third in class last year at Pebble in the unrestored class. So Pebble would take this, Villareste would take this in a heartbeat. That's another one of the benefits. I will just say a modern benefit about dream cars is they're always all-stars at events. And so what this has over most dream cars is this thing's really friggin' easy to drive. Instrument panel real easy to see. Seat's actually quite comfortable, and so as I was saying earlier, what's nice for us tall guys is even though this has a somewhat low slung roof line, there's a lot of headroom in this thing. Visibility everywhere is excellent. How are we looking in the rear view mirror? Rear view mirror is not that bad. Somebody put in an auxiliary mirror just in case. So here's something that's kind of fun, you guys, is it's not exactly rack and pinion steering, which was as I'm moving the wheel around, and it's nice fluid, action, all that type of stuff. But man, it's not the world's most responsive piece of machinery, but that's real typical of a lot of things of this type. Yeah, this engine feels nice and healthy. Transmission shifts smoothly, and I could keep us going for quite a while and enjoy myself, but I think I'm going to take us back just because this is such a rare piece. So I hope you enjoyed our real brief drive in a fantastic piece of unobtainium. So I've really enjoyed our time with the Dual Ghia 400. It's a marvelous piece of unobtainium. I love going down and excavating in these areas because you never know where the trail's going to take you. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing where we meet up next.